really enjoying it so far. I think one of the things which is important for people like me working in, say, macroeconomics is, and more in financial markets rather than the physical world, is this is a great opportunity to bridge the gap between the sometimes very unreal and fake world of finance and the very real world of people who are physically involved with the grain trade, and this is a fantastic opportunity to get a good cross section of opinions and views. I think the sheer numbers, you sort of never really quite appreciate how many people come to these sort of things and how many people are involved in it, even though you sort of know, but you're sort of, at the end of the day, it becomes a bit of a surprise that there's so many. I think the two issues at the moment which are important are obviously the trade tensions and this move against globalization resulting in trade protectionism. Above all, cheer-led, if one wants to call it that. I'm sure a lot of other people feel uncomfortable having Mr. Trump cheerleading this particular process, but it's the sheer level of aggression which has been involved. Perhaps we should sometimes have a look at things in smaller detail. So we had a lot of kerfuffle about NAFTA. It's been renamed. If you actually look at the amount of changes which were made to it, perhaps we shouldn't worry so much, given a lot of the changes were really quite small. Perhaps the only significant one was actually to do with currency markets. Though again, it's not something which wasn't there before. So at every G20 meeting for the last 3 years, the various countries have made a commitment not to manipulate their currencies. And this is just, the difference between the USMCA and NAFTA is that particular commitment is actually written into the treaty. Which does give it, I suppose, a bit of legal force, but is it really new? No. Will it stop people at the margin manipulating the currencies? I very much doubt it. But I think in terms of where we go from here, so it's been true for a long time that financial markets have looked at political risk, they talk about political risk, and then most of the time they just go, yeah, really. Since we had Brexit and then we had the election of Donald Trump, people have had to start to take it more seriously. Obviously, there's an interesting contrast here between foreign exchange markets and commodity markets. Commodity markets have always been subject to political interference, shall we call it. So these are definitely the most important things as we go forward, because it really, how the US-Chinese relationship develops is going to be critical to whether we really continue with this process of anti-globalization and protectionism, or whether we start to roll back. And that, in turn, will dictate the outlook for the global economy, because if we get more and more protectionist, the more likely it is that we're going to suffer in terms of global growth as people become more and more isolated and confrontational in the way that they behave. As one central banker put it, economic growth doesn't die because it's been going on for a long time. So the possibility that we have a crisis is definitely possible, because we are at that stage where central banks are starting to walk away from the extreme monetary accommodation that we've had over the past 10 years since the global financial crisis. The question is, are we able to deal with it? Have we actually got over the problems that were there beforehand? Do we actually have a more stable banking system? And have we actually replaced more stable markets with a more stable banking system? Because one of the risks, the big risk with what's been done, is that banks are unlikely to suffer in the way that they did in post the global financial crisis. Their balance sheets are much better, they can't take on as much risk. But that means if we actually get to a point where credit starts to tighten, if there's a shortage of dollars in the world, then we could be in a situation where financial markets become even more volatile than they say they were in 2008 and 2009. And that would definitely entail a crisis on the following. I think we're at this stage where I think everyone got surprised just how big those Russian crops were last year. So everyone's on the wheat crop side. So people are now looking around, and I think they're looking particularly down the One Belt, One Road area, that bit which has been called Pipelanistan. It's the One Belt, One Road area. It's the southern part of what used to be the USSR, and there's a lot there which could potentially act if we start to get into a more protectionist world, where, say, China buys less wheat from the US, say less in the way of grains overall, then it may be looking to the likes of the biggest one being Kazakhstan outside of Russia to replace some of the imports that they used to get from the USA from those areas, and that in turn, via the One Belt, One Road project, may actually encourage more development in the agricultural sector. It's a complex question, this one. I think really the big impact is we have markets which jump around a lot more because someone's said something on Twitter. And we're in a world where beforehand people used to, say, get a report in physical form, a 10, 20, 30-page report. They'd read through it, they'd think about it, and then they'd take some action. Now you've got the case where financial markets see a headline, don't know the detail, but think, oh, well, it's good or it's bad. And that creates a lot more volatility. It means we've got a much more responsive market, but what are we responding to? And secondly, does it mean that people are only skimming over the surface of big topics which are actually going to affect whichever market you're talking about? It could be an equity market, it could be a commodity market, the oil market. Are we just sort of surfing the waves of this, or actually do we understand how, what the mechanics are of this in the long term? Because in the long run, the underlying fundamentals will always assert themselves, particularly in things like agricultural commodities or oil or metals. The question is basically, post the elections in which the Democrats have now got hold of the House of Representatives, how does Mr. Trump respond? Does he, given that he's got less room for maneuver in terms of just basically being able to dictate to Congress what he wants, because he has to get the approvals of the Democrats, does he tread a more softly line with China? Or does he think, well, this is one of the areas which I can go for the win, as it's called, and get more aggressive? We're going to see what happens at that G20 meeting to see the noises at the moment are seemingly more cooperative, which is a good thing. However, with Donald Trump, we all know that today's cooperation is tomorrow's vilification. You only have to look at what's happened between Mr. Trump and Mr. Macron over the last week to get a very good idea of it. So I'm not sure that we can actually count on a more cooperative stance. Well, I think there's two things which have impressed me. Obviously, there are certain parts, and the ADM obviously itself, along with Cargill and Bunge and Louis Dreyfus, are looking at digitalizing the whole process of grain trade, which is a good thing. That's an advance. But what's impressed me most, actually, is we've had two lots of very bad weather cycles in quite large stretches of the world over the past 2 years. We have typically reacted in a lot of markets, whether it's barley, whether it's wheat, corn, soybeans, by saying, well, that means there's going to be less supply. what's actually proved to be the fact is that the grain technology, the seed technology that's been developed in recent years, so we're sort of moving more into the biotech area, has actually made the crops far more resilient to these weather shocks. And I think it's something which the agricultural markets are going to have to get more used to, particularly in the area of sphere of grains, not necessarily soft. Because obviously people can't be complacent. You can always have something which is complete and utter devastation. On the other hand, if we are able to fret less, then we are about weather effects. They are more of a marginal impact. They'll never be completely marginal. Then we can probably plan better in terms of the way that crops are rotated, what areas to focus on, and act with a good deal more confidence, rather than worrying that one year is going to be a bumpy year and the next year is going to be a complete, well, near famine year.